in the shooting of a German tourist yesterday. 4 tourists were stopped by armed suspects in White River in Mpumalanga. The driver was shot at point-blank range while attempting to lock the car after the attackers demanded that they should open the doors. The Minister of Tourism, Lindiwe Sisulu, has condemned the killing.
Trigger warning. This video contains details about violent crime and murder. Viewer discretion is advised. He had waited years for this trip. Jörg Schnarr was a 67-year-old retiree from Germany who had spent decades working hard building a peaceful life for himself and his family. He wasn't a man of extravagance, but he had one dream: to experience the raw, majestic beauty of Africa's wilderness. Not through a screen, not in a book, but in person. In October 2022, that dream was finally becoming a reality. Jörg and his wife boarded a plane with close friends, their itinerary carefully planned: Johannesburg to Mpumalanga, a drive through the countryside, and then a few unforgettable days at Kruger National Park, one of the most iconic wildlife reserves in the world. Jörg wasn't just a tourist. He was a man who believed in nature, in adventure, in the thrill of stepping into something unknown and beautiful. To him, South Africa wasn't a destination, it was a story waiting to be lived. He packed his camera, his guidebooks, his wide-brimmed hat. He was ready for elephants, lions, starlit skies, and stories to bring home. It was supposed to be the lifetime, but just hours before reaching his lodge, on a road lined with dry brush and sun-baked tar, his life was violently stolen, ambushed, shot, and left to die in front of his wife and friends less than 5 kilometers from the safety and serenity of Kruger's gates. The world never got to hear Jörg Schnarr's story. His name didn't trend for days. His death didn't cause global protests, but what happened to him matters because it wasn't just a murder. It was a failure of warning systems, of tourist protection, of justice delayed far too often in the shadows of paradise. This is not just a story about a crime, it's about a man, a dream, and a tragic warning echoing across one of Africa's most beloved destinations. This is the story of Jörg Schnarr. Before the headlines, before the tragedy, before the gunshot that would make global news, there was simply Jörg. Born in Germany in the mid-1950s, Jörg Schnarr came of age in a country rebuilding itself economically, emotionally, and socially after the Second World War. Like many in his generation, Jörg grew up with a deep appreciation for peace, stability, and the value of hard work. From a young age, he was known to be curious and disciplined. The kind of child who would ask questions about how machines worked, who loved the outdoors, and who was raised with a sense of responsibility. Germany in the 1960s and 70s was a country in motion engineering, innovation, and global re-entry were on the rise. Jörg embraced that momentum. He went on to build a career in technical services, working for decades as an engineer or consultant, quietly becoming the kind of person that others relied on: steady, loyal, dependable. A man who didn't seek the spotlight, but earned the respect of those around him. In his personal life, Jörg was a family man. He married young and stayed devoted to his wife for more than 4 decades. Together, they built a life grounded in love, mutual respect, and shared adventures. The couple raised 2 children, and by the time of his retirement, Jörg had become a grandfather too, one who treasured his family deeply and took pride in watching his children flourish in a modern, united Europe. Those who knew him say he had a quiet humor, a love for nature, and a deep admiration for African wildlife. He would often talk about the Big Five, read about conservation efforts, and dream of one day seeing lions, elephants, and rhinos up close, not in a zoo, but where they belonged. His retirement in 2022 wasn't a slowdown, it was a beginning. He started planning travel with his wife and close friends. South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana were at the top of his list. The plan was simple: live the life he had always worked for. And that brings us to October 2022, when Jörg and his wife finally landed in Johannesburg, full of excitement, anticipation, and that rare peace that comes from knowing you've earned every moment. What none of them could have imagined was that the country Jörg admired from afar would become the place of his final breath. On the morning of the 3rd of October, 2022, the sun rose over Mpumalanga, casting golden light across the bushveld and gravel roads leading to the legendary Kruger National Park. For tourists around the world, this is the kind of morning they dream of, air buzzing with anticipation, cameras packed, the promise of lions, elephants, and untamed beauty just around the corner. Jörg Schnarr, his wife, and 2 of their close friends were among them. They had touched down in South Africa only days before and were now headed toward their lodge inside Kruger, the Mdluli Safari Lodge near Numbi Gate. They had rented a Hyundai Staria minivan, a sleek, comfortable vehicle ideal for sightseeing. They had plotted their route, booked their accommodation, and followed the GPS instructions from their Johannesburg hotel to the park. But there was one thing didn't know: a silent danger, hidden in the road they were taking. Numbi Road, the access route leading to Numbi Gate, has long been known by locals as risky. It winds through rural settlements, largely unmonitored, poorly maintained in places, and plagued by a dark history of criminal activity. In fact, for years, tourist blogs and South African forums had issued urgent warnings: avoid Numbi Road, use Fabani Gate or Paul Kruger Gate instead. The warnings, however, were not prominently displayed by the car rental agency, not enforced by the lodge, and not visible in the standard tourist information. Jörg and his companions had no reason to expect danger. As they cruised along the road that morning, they were just minutes away from their destination. The minivan moved steadily through the landscape, acacia trees on the horizon, dust rising gently behind them, but then, out of nowhere, a vehicle blocked the road. It was a setup, a premeditated ambush. Armed men emerged, their intentions clear, their weapons drawn. It was a hijacking. The attackers rushed the van, shouting in a language the German tourists couldn't understand. But panic needs no translation. Jörg instinctively reached for the lock button. He locked the doors, hoping to shield his wife and friends from harm. The attackers banged on the windows, demanding entry. They circled the van, shouting, and then one of them raised a gun. In a split second, a shot rang out, piercing the passenger side window. The bullet struck Jörg in the upper torso, critically wounding him. Bleeding and gasping for breath, Jörg tried to reverse the vehicle, perhaps hoping to turn around and reach help. The vehicle jerked backward, a desperate, heartbreaking final act of protection. But he couldn't go far. The loss of blood, the trauma, and the shock overtook him. He died at the wheel, slumped in the driver's seat, just meters away from what should have been the gateway to paradise. His wife and friends were left in hysterical shock, trapped in a crime scene they couldn't understand, in a country they barely knew, watching a beloved husband and friend die before their eyes. And in a cruel twist, the attackers didn't even take anything. No cash, no passports, no luggage. They fled the scene in chaos, leaving behind nothing but blood and grief. In the moments following the shooting, time seemed to stop. Inside the minivan, Jörg Schnarr's wife and friends were paralyzed with shock. One of them called for help using a mobile phone, but they were in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by bush, far from the tourist centers, and gripped by fear. Help would take time, and time was something Jörg no longer had. By the time emergency responders arrived, he was already gone. The South African Police Service, SAPS, cordoned off the scene quickly. News of the incident broke almost immediately, not just in local media, but across Germany, Europe, and global tourism circles. The story was chilling. A German tourist shot dead at the gates of one of Africa's most iconic parks. International outrage followed swiftly. South Africa's Minister of Tourism at the time, Lindiwe Sisulu, issued a public statement expressing deep condolences to the Schnarr family and strongly condemning the crime. She emphasized the importance of tourist safety and urged law enforcement to bring the perpetrators to justice without delay. But for many, that wasn't enough. Questions echoed across communities. Why was Numbi Road still open? Why weren't tourists warned about known hijacking risks? Who was responsible for the systemic failure? Meanwhile, behind the scenes, an intense manhunt began. Within days, SAPS partnered with the Elite Hawks Investigative Unit, South Africa's Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation. Officers combed the area, interviewed witnesses, and followed surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras. They traced cell phone signals, analyzed call logs, and built profiles on known hijackers in the area. Eventually, the web began to tighten. By early November 2022, a breakthrough. 3 suspects were arrested in connection with the ambush. Napoleon Joseph Nyalunga, 35, Marshall Sebo Mamba, 38, Bongo Musa Fortune Matsani, 25. All 3 were charged with murder, attempted hijacking, possession of an unlicensed firearm. In court, the prosecution revealed that the suspects had targeted the minivan, believing it to contain valuables. When Jörg refused to unlock the doors, their intent escalated from robbery to murder. A single shot, fired in anger, had killed a man who posed no threat, who simply wanted to protect his loved ones. Shockingly, despite the fatal outcome, the suspects left empty-handed. No money, no phones, not even the car was taken. Their arrests were announced to the public as a major success in a case that had shaken faith in South Africa's ability to protect its visitors. But for the family of Jörg Schnarr, it was only the beginning of a long, painful journey toward justice. In 2023, the case was transferred to the Mbombela High Court in Mpumalanga. The court set a trial date for July 2024. While behind bars awaiting trial, the accused were remanded in custody. Legal proceedings had been slow, as is often the case in South Africa's overburdened justice system. On the 28th of November 2024, the Mpumalanga High Court found Napoleon Joseph Nyalunga guilty of murder, attempted robbery, and possession of a firearm in connection with the fatal shooting of Mr. Schnarr on the 3rd of October 2022 near the Kruger National Park. The sentencing was scheduled for the 9th of December 2024. Regarding the other two suspects, Marshal Sibo Mamba and Bongomusa Fortune Matsane, the court discharged them during the trial under Section 174 of the Criminal Procedure Act, citing insufficient evidence to proceed against them. This case has underscored concerns about tourist safety in South Africa, particularly around the Numbi Gate area of the Kruger National Park. In response, authorities have implemented enhanced security measures, including increased patrols and surveillance, to protect visitors. The murder of Jörg Schnarr wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning to tourists, to the tourism industry, and to a nation long grappling with violent crime. Jörg's death drew sharp criticism from international observers and travel safety forums, who pointed to a disturbing pattern of crime near Kruger National Park, particularly around Numbi Gate. While Kruger remains one of the top tourist destinations in Africa, many have called for the permanent closure of Numbi Road, citing its history of hijackings, robberies, and threats. In response, SANParks, South African national parks, and local law enforcement took action. They increased police patrols along tourist routes, installed new signage warning travelers about crime hotspots, and improved communication with tour operators. Yet for many, these changes came too late. A man had already died, a family had already lost their anchor, and a country once again found itself answering for a crime that could have been prevented. In Germany, Jörg's funeral was held quietly, surrounded by his wife, children, grandchildren, and lifelong friends. His obituary spoke not of how he died, but of how he lived. A man who worked hard, loved deeply, and dreamed of Africa. A man who died protecting others. In a country as breathtaking as South Africa, where mountains meet oceans and lions roam under starlit skies, there is still a shadow that follows the beauty, the persistent, heart-wrenching reality of violent crime. Jörg Schnarr came to South Africa seeking peace, adventure, and a once-in-a-lifetime experience. He found kindness, wilderness, and wonder, but also chaos, violence, and death. Let his story not be forgotten. Let it be a call to action for safer travel routes, better protection for visitors, and accountability for those who use violence as currency. To his family, we offer our condolences. And to you, our audience, thank you for watching Once Upon a Crime, South Africa. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to help us amplify the voices of the forgotten and the fallen. Comment below. What more should be done to protect tourists in high-risk areas? Because in the end, these are not just crimes, they are stories, real, tragic, unfinished. And we are here to tell them.